necessarily as software development focused, but are more general office type project management. There are lists and calendars that Atlassian targets non-development teams like marketing, HR, and so on. Next, we have Jira Service Management, used to be called Jira Service Desk. And think of a help desk type scenario where you need customers to be able to access frequently asked questions or FAQs, a knowledge base, the ability to submit service request tickets, and then being able to track those on the back end, tracking assets and things like that. That's where service management can really help. So for this course, we're going to be using Jira software. As I mentioned earlier, 9 times out of 10, when somebody says they're using Jira, what they mean is Jira software. Oh, and there is a little asterisk to this. I want to make sure I point out that I am not going to be using Jira Software Premium. There is a premium version of Jira Software. It costs a little bit more, and it's going to give you some more things like advanced roadmaps, unlimited storage for attachments, IP allow listing, and so on. We still have attachments in Jira Software Standard, which is what I'm going to be using in this course. You just don't have unlimited storage. So things like that. And that brings us to Jira's licenses. There are essentially 2 ways to license Jira. Either you can buy a license to Jira and install it on your own server. That's called Jira Server. And there's pros and cons to this. On Jira Server, since it's on your server, you can customize it a lot more than you can with the other version of Jira we'll get to in a minute. Of course, customizing it as new versions of Jira come out, you make customizations that could break with those updates, so it can get pretty involved. You may need some developers on staff in order to maintain the installation of Jira itself. So if you're a smaller team and don't have the resources to keep up with the updates, then you can get Jira Cloud as a subscription. One of the key benefits to Cloud is that Atlassian manages the backend completely, and they keep it up to date with the latest version automatically for you. In this course, we will be using Jira software on Cloud. But no matter what version of Jira you're using, again, the core concepts that we're going to learn in this course are essentially customizing it as new versions of ways to license Jira. Either you can buy a license to Jira and install it on your own, get Jira Cloud. In this course, we will be using Jira software on Cloud. But no matter what version of Jira you're using, again, the core concepts that we're going to learn in this course are essentially the same. You just might have some different features. For example, if you are using Jira Server and your administrator hasn't updated it to the latest version, then of course you're not going to have some of those newer features that are in Jira software on Cloud. Speaking of features, one great thing about Jira is how many plugins and apps they have available to really extend its features beyond the core functionality. But those come at an extra cost. And so for this course, I will not be using any third-party apps from the Atlassian Marketplace. I will only be using the core functionality that comes with the license of Jira software on Cloud. Okay, so that wraps up this section. When you're ready, I will see you in the next section where we'll start to unpack some of the key terms and concepts you need to know before we dive into Jira. See you there. In this video, we'll take a couple minutes to understand exactly what Jira is and what it's used for. Simply put, Jira is a project management and issue tracking tool. As a fun little fact, the name Jira actually comes from Gojira, the Japanese name for Godzilla. Now, there are a lot of different ways that companies organize their projects: Waterfall, Six Sigma, Prince 2, and so on. Some of these methodologies or ways of organizing and getting work done are similar to each other. Some of them are quite different from each other. Overall, the methodology that a company uses to organize and get work done can determine the tool that they use to organize all of that. When you're using Jira, it will assume your team is using the Agile methodology. Now, I've worked with teams who are using Jira and they're not using the Agile methodology. There are apps and plugins that you can get in order to have Jira organize things in a different way. But by default, without any extended capabilities, Jira itself is an Agile tool. This course is not really designed to be a deep dive into Agile methodology, but there are a lot of Agile terms and concepts that we'll come across inside of Jira. So that's why it's important to take the time to understand some of those core Agile terms and concepts. Now, if you're already familiar with Agile, then great. You can skip over the next few videos. But if you're new to Agile, or if you just want a quick refresher, then I'll see you in our next video where we'll get a crash course on the basics of Agile methodology. In this video, we'll get an overview of Agile methodology. Now, before we begin, I want to point out that this is not going to be an in-depth look at Agile. There are tons of great courses and workshops out there that do take a deep dive into Agile methodology. But if we were to try to do that in this course, there wouldn't be any time left over for Jira. As we learned in an earlier video, though, before we can understand how Jira works, there are some things about how Agile works that we need to understand first, because Jira just assumes that we already know them. So that's the purpose of this video, to give a crash course on Agile in a single video. For our purposes today, the term Agile refers to a methodology that software development teams around the world use to get stuff done. It's a methodology that promotes adaptive planning, evolutionary development, early delivery, continuous improvement, and encourages rapid and flexible response to change. Now, Jira certainly is not the only Agile tool out there. There's quite a few of them. In fact, I've worked with teams that prefer to use a simple whiteboard on the wall in the office with something like Post-it notes instead of using a digital tool at all. But, of course, physical whiteboards won't work for everyone. There is no right or wrong tool when it comes to Agile. It's more about what's right for your team or your organization. With that in mind, Jira is something that some of the world's largest companies and organizations are using for their Agile workflows, because for a lot of teams, it is a lot easier to see things using a digital tool like Jira. To organize our work using Agile methodology, one of the most important tools that we'll use is an Agile board. And that begs the question, what is an Agile board? On an Agile board, we'll have different columns. In Agile, sometimes they're called lanes. In Jira, they're called columns. Think of these as the steps you need to get a project done. In the simplest project, there's going to be at least 3 columns: to do or not started, so the project hasn't even been started yet; in progress, it's currently being worked on; and done, it's complete. Of course, boards can get even more complex than that, and in Jira, you can customize it to add in whatever sort of columns that you want, but this is just a simple example of an Agile board. Now, underneath Agile, there are 2 primary ways to organize projects. There are different workflows for how your team tackles those projects and the process that they use to get them done. One is called Scrum, and the other is Kanban. The differences between these could be an entire course in and of itself, but for our purposes today, there's really one key difference to keep in mind. And that difference has to do with something called a sprint. And again, that begs the question. You can start to see why some of these concepts that we're going to see inside of Jira doesn't really explain them. One key difference to keep in mind. Workflows for how to add in whatever sort of columns that you want, but this is just a simple example of an Agile board. Now, underneath Agile, there are 2 primary ways to organize projects. There are different workflows for how your team tackles those projects and the process that they use to get them done. One is called Scrum, and the other is Kanban. The differences between these could be an entire course in and of itself, but for our purposes today, there's really one key difference to keep in mind. And that difference has to do with something called a sprint. And again, that begs the question. You can start to see why some of these concepts that we're going to see inside of Jira doesn't really explain them. So what is a sprint? Well, a sprint is a predetermined amount of time where these concepts that we're going to see inside of Jira doesn't really explain them. So what is a sprint? Well, a sprint is a predetermined amount of time where teams determine what work is going to get done in that time. Let's make it easier. Let's walk through an example of this just to explain. So let's say our team has decided we're going to work with a 2-week sprint. So that means every 2 weeks, our team is going to hold a sprint meeting. In that sprint meeting, it might look something like this. Start by discussing the last sprint. A lot of teams that I work with, they prefer to go around each individual team member and go around and say, what went well for you in the last sprint? What didn't go well for you in the last sprint? Are there any roadblocks that you came across or things that we can try to work better. This goes back to that iterative and continuous improvement. What can we do better the next sprint? And then as a team, discuss and agree on the work. And again, usually teams that I've worked with, they'll go around individually, each team member, discuss and agree the work that's going to be completed in the next sprint. What's the highest priority thing to do in the next 2 weeks? Then day-to-day workflow will be taking those projects. So let's say these are the 3 things that I need to get done in the next sprint. And again, if there's a priority level to these, then of course that will be something that we discuss in the sprint meeting. If there's not, then it'll be up to me to determine which ones of these I need to get done. We just know that we need to get these 3 things done in the next 2 weeks. So the process for this is to take a single ticket and drag it all the way from left to right before you bring another one on. You don't want to have multiple things in progress if you can help it. You take one all the way over to completion until they're all done. Then after another 2 weeks, you're going to hold another sprint meeting. And in that sprint meeting, just like the last one, it's going to go around and say, what went well? Were you able to get all the tickets across the board? If not, what sort of roadblocks did you come across that kept you from being able to complete all of those things that we had said needed to get done? What can we do better to make sure that we're able to hit those in the future, or is there better communication between teams? And as a team leader, it's really helpful to hear some of these roadblocks that your team is having to be able to fix those so that more work can get done. And then again, discuss and agree the work that's going to be completed in the next sprint and keep going. Now, with that said, not every team works best with these blocks of time for their project, with these sprints. Sometimes it might be better for your team to work on projects on an ongoing basis, and that is where Kanban comes into play. So in a Kanban workflow, the board's may look very similar, but the workflow is going to be different, where you take your ticket and you drag it over. Again, you're still going to try to get that all the way to completion if you can, but as you're working on things, new issues, new tickets may be added to the board at any given time. Because with Kanban, it's more of an ongoing thing. You're working on projects on an ongoing basis. Okay, so to recap, we have the Agile methodology is made up of 2 primary ways to organize and the process for getting our projects completed. One is Scrum, which has a sprint, where your team will sit down and figure out all the projects that your team needs to get done in that predetermined amount of time. Then there's Kanban, where there aren't sprints, but your team works on projects on an ongoing basis. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there's a ton more depth that we could go into when it comes to Agile, but we're ready now to move on to some of the key Agile terms that we'll find inside of Jira. And we'll learn more about those in our next video. In this video, we'll look at a couple of Agile terms that we'll come across a lot in Jira: stories and epics. So this is a screenshot of what it looks like when we create a new issue in Jira. And this screenshot right here is one of the most common reasons why I get this question from folks who are new to Jira. Why does this say story? What this is referring to is a concept inside of Agile methodology called user stories. So a user story has a formula that goes something like this. As a blank type of user, I want blank some sort of goal, so that blank some sort of reason. Here's an example. As a web developer, I want to be able to add users to Jira so that my coworkers can report bugs. Or another example would be, as a driver, I want my car's dashboard to be voice activated so that I can get directions safely while driving. Or as a cashier, I want to have the total calculated for me so that I can give the correct change back to the customer. These are just examples. Not all user stories have to be done exactly like that, but you can see the wide variety here, kind of using that same formula. And generally speaking, user stories in Agile are how developers around the world break up their work. You'll notice that there's no technology mentioned. It's done this way specifically to leave all the technical stuff out of it. That doesn't matter. The person driving the car here just wants to be able to get directions safely while they're driving. They don't care how you get the GPS to be voice activated. They just want it to work. As a developer, figuring out the technical stuff to achieve that goal is your job. And that brings us to epics. So probably the easiest way to think of epics is like a big, massive, well, epic-sized story. Not every story needs to live inside an epic, but if you have something, especially if you're using Scrum, when you're working with sprints, like the example in our last video, we had a 2-week sprint. If we're working on something that's going to take longer than 2 weeks to get done, then that's going to be an epic, and we want to break that down into smaller projects, essentially, into smaller user stories that can be tracked in the epic. So the hierarchy can look something like this, where you have multiple stories all linked to that epic. So here's an example. Let's say the epic is the core functionality for a note-taking app, say that we're building. probably not going to be able to get that done in a single sprint. But here are a few stories that we may be able to get done in a single sprint. So we can work on one of those, and then the next sprint we can work on another. And we can start to see, as we track the epic, have those stories linked to it, being able to track the overall progress in the epic is a really great way of being able to break down big projects, big epic projects, into small ones to get them done. Okay, so to recap, when you see stories in Jira, it's referring to user stories, and epics in Jira contain multiple user stories, or other issue types as well. We'll get to that later on in this course. Oh, and I should probably mention, if you're using Jira for more than your dev team, stories don't really have to be written out that way every time. Because Jira is created as a dev tool, stories are basically the default method of organizing your projects inside of Jira. Now, I've worked with marketing teams and graphics teams that all use Jira software, and they just use stories as whatever project they need to get done in their sprints. But that probably raises another question, because user stories and epics sure sound a lot like the projects that you need to get done at work. And I've even mentioned that, they're the projects you need to get done. And they are, but Jira also has projects too. So what are those? Because that's a different thing. That's exactly the sort of thing that can make Jira so confusing when you first jump into it. So now that we're familiar with what stories and epics are, let's clarify some Jira terminology by moving on to our next video, where we'll learn about some Jira terms we need to know. In this video, we'll look at a couple more terms we'll see in Jira: issues and projects. Now, at first, these terms seem very straightforward. We all know what issues are, and we all know what projects are. But what does Jira mean when it's using these terms? Because it might not be what you think. Let's start with issues. Issues are the heart of what you'll be tracking in Jira. Issues are containers for fields, and fields hold all of your data. So things like the description, the summary, who it's assigned to, a due date, attachments, comments, all of those things are fields on issues. One of my favorite ways to explain issues is to think of them like Post-it notes. The note itself is really just an empty container. You can put any sort of information that you want on it. You can even color coordinate your notes to help organize that information better. Just like inside of Jira, you can have different issue types. Now, you can also have a custom issue type, but it does come with some pre-installed like stories and epics like we learned about in the last video. Maybe on the story issue type, you want to have the summary, description, and due date. Maybe on the bug issue type, you also want to have the OS, or the operating system, so it's easier to know where that bug took place, so it can be fixed easier. All of this is customizable, of course. It kind of depends on what sort of data you need to track, but you can start to get a sense for what Jira means when it's talking about issues and how you can have different fields on different issues. And that brings us to projects. Now, as I mentioned earlier in this course, projects in Jira probably aren't really what you think of when you think of a project. By that, what I mean is when you start a new project at work, that does not necessarily mean you're going to start a new project in Jira to track it. So let's go back to our example of the Post-it notes here. We have these different projects. All of the issues in the top row are in the web dev project. All of the issues in the middle row are in the marketing project. All of the issues in the bottom row are in the customer service project. Those issues actually live inside of the project. And in the project settings is where you can tell Jira what types of issues will live in there, right? And of course, as we learned, the issues contain the data and contain different types of fields. So let's say in the web dev project, we want to be able to have bugs, so we can track those in there. But the marketing project doesn't need bugs, so we're going to hide that from them. We're not even going to show them bugs because they don't need to see that. You can start to get a sense for how you can customize this to fit your organization's needs, so they can see the information, they can track the information that they need, and anything else that just would end up being clutter and hinder productivity, they don't even need to see. Okay, so to recap, as we learned, issues are things like stories, epics, bugs. Those are types of issues in Jira, and of course, you can create your own custom issue types as well if you don't want to, or if you want to add to the ones that are the built-in, pre-built ones that come with Jira. And issues hold the fields that contain your data. Now, projects are where the issues live inside of Jira. You're not necessarily going to be creating a bunch of projects all the time. Okay, so now that we have a good understanding of some key concepts, let's actually hop into Jira. So we'll do that in the next video. In this video, we'll start getting familiar with Jira by looking at its interface. Now, when you first log in by default, Jira will send you to this area called Your Work. Right now, you can see there's not really a lot here because we haven't done a lot of work in Jira yet. But as we continue throughout this course, we'll see things. Things like the recent projects that we visit will show up here, items that we've worked on, issues that we've worked on, issues that we viewed, or things that we view here, issues that are assigned to us, or any items that we starred or favorited, bookmark, same sort of concept. But for now, let's get understanding what we're looking at here. Start by moving from the top up at the top left-hand side. So this is the app switcher, and in here we can switch between the different Atlassian products that we have. So you can see if we have add Confluence, which is Atlassian's wiki tool for documentation, knowledge base, things like that. If we had that, then we would see that actually right here. Or we could start a trial if we wanted to. Of course, the key thing to keep in mind here is starting the trial or actually subscribing to this, since I'm using Jira software on cloud, that would be another subscription. So in order to do that, we would actually have to have administrative permissions, which means access to the billing information as well to be able to set that up. Or down here at the bottom, we can actually, if we have administrative permissions, we can customize this. So you may see some different things, just adding in different links. I've worked with teams that add links to a different intranet or specific documentation, website, things like that. Just a quick way to link that, being able to see that up here very, very quickly, directly inside of Jira. Next to that, we have the Jira logo here. Depending on your organization, this may be your company's logo. The Jira administrator has the ability to customize this. But by default, when you click on this, it's going to take you right back to your work where we were when we first logged in. So at any point, if you get lost in Jira, you can click on the logo up here and it will take you back home. After that, again, we have your work. But here, we have quick access and menu. Some of the things that we would see on this page. But as we're working in Jira, sometimes it's faster to not have to navigate to this page fully. So we can see the recent things that we've viewed. You can see some recent dashboards or filters that we've viewed. We can go to the Your Work page. It's probably faster just to click on the link up here, as well as being able to see recent boards that we've looked at. Don't worry, we're going to look at Agile boards and these boards later on. Just know that this is where you can access a lot of the recent things that we've looked at. Then moving along, a lot of these will start to make sense as we're going through this course, because we'll be looking at what the projects and filters and dashboards are. I know we got a sense for the concept of projects previously, but we'll actually see them working inside of Jira, so it'll start to make more sense. But for now, just know that this is where you're going to access all of those things. So you can see I have a project that I've starred here, and actually we can come in, and if we remove it from the start, then we'll see. see this update. We'll go ahead and refresh. We can see it's no longer starred, it's recent. So as we view more projects, this one will eventually get kicked off this list in the menu. Or we could come in and we can star that to make sure that it is always there in this menu. As well as, of course, as you can imagine, finding it under all of our starred items on your work page. Next to the projects, we have filters. Now, essentially, in a nutshell, filters are saved searches. And like projects, you can star your favorite filters if you want to make sure you can see them up here for quick access. You can view all the filters that you have, or you can start building a new one through advanced search. And again, we'll look at that in more depth later on in this course. Next to the filter, we have dashboards. So a dashboard is essentially a quick way to access things that we're working on, or build charts, things like that. But one of the big differences between this dashboard and the Your Work section is Your Work is just focused on you, the user that is currently logged in. A dashboard can be customized. You can add in different gadgets, different reports, different maybe pie charts, things like that, and then share them across different users. Multiple teams can have the same dashboard so everybody sees the bugs as they come in, things like that, as opposed to everybody going to their own Your Work page, which is going to change as different users are seeing different things. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. One thing I would like to point out with this is, depending on your version of Jira, if you're using an older version of Jira, then the dashboards are the default place that you go to when you log in. The Your Work section is relatively new in the last year or so. Around 2020, I believe, is when they started to migrate over to the Your Work section being the default place where you log in. Next to dashboards, we have people. So this is where you can find other people in your organization. You can start a team. We'll look at this later on in this course. It's just a place where you can get a collection of people together to work on things and being able to see what other people are working on very quickly. And then, of course, we have the apps. And I mentioned this in the last section, the Atlassian Marketplace, where there's a lot of functionality that you can add onto Jira. Throughout this course, I will not be using any of these apps or add-ons. This course is specifically designed that way, so I won't be using those extra third-party things that you won't have access to without paying. But you can explore the marketplace and you can find new apps in here. Moving right along, we can click on the Create button to create an issue. And don't worry, we'll be looking at this screen and we'll be using this quite a bit throughout this course. Just know that's where you can create an issue here. And then up at the top right-hand side, we have search. So searching for issues or boards or things in our Jira installation, we can search for those here. I do want to point out that we can get to the advanced search, which is the where we can go to create our filters. So again, under filters, you can see the advanced issue search going to the same place, just another way to get there. Or we can see all of the issues in our Jira installation, all of our boards, projects, filters, or people. One thing I do want to point out here has to do with the permission levels. So going through all the issues, if you are a Jira administrator, you're going to be able to see everything. If you're not a Jira administrator, you're going to be able to see all of the issues you have access to. So that might be a specific project, but you might have access to the web dev project, but not the marketing project, for example. That is going to be set up, those permissions are set up by your Jira administrator. And then over here we have notifications. So this is pretty straightforward. You'll start to see numbers pop up here when you have notifications, like when someone comments on an issue that you're watching, or when someone tags your username somewhere in Jira. This is just a quick way to hop to wherever those notifications come from. You can see down here it's saying, hey, there's notifications in chat apps, right? You can connect your Jira installation to Slack or to Teams to get notifications in there. You can get notifications through email as well. But then all of the notifications that you see in any of those other integrations, you'll also see here inside of Jira showing up at the top right-hand side here. And then we have help. This is pretty straightforward, but I do want to point it out because if at any point as you're following along with this course, if something doesn't make sense, make use of this. Atlassian has some super detailed and incredibly helpful documentation that can answer just about any question that you have. And not only for this version of Jira, but they have it for previous versions as well. So if you're using an older version of Jira Server and you see something that I'm working on that is a newer feature that you don't have access to, then you can do a search for it and see if there's a workaround or if there's something else that you can do in there. And if the help documentation doesn't have what you're looking for, Atlassian's support team is amazing. Even though I am not associated with Atlassian at all, I've interacted with their support team a lot over the years, and they've been really helpful to either fix a problem or even if it's just someone to bounce ideas off of for the best practices. Say, hey, this is what I want to do. What's the best way to set this up and organize this inside of Jira? So take advantage of the help if you ever get stuck. Then we have our settings. So if you're a user, you'll have limited options in here. You won't have access to things like your organization's billing details and all of that information, as well as adding users. That's something that will increase bill. So depending on your permission level, that will determine what you see in here. But at the very least, you will see things like your personal settings. So you're managing your time zone, managing your email notifications that you get directly from Jira, things like that, your profile information, stuff like that. And then, of course, last but not least, we have our personal settings, same as pretty much coming in here. Changing profile, things like that. Pretty straightforward stuff as far as the personal settings are concerned. Okay, so that is a look at the user interface in Jira. I know I threw a ton at you there. And of course, as you've seen throughout this video, as we choose things from the top navigation, then all of this area here is going to change to show whatever it is, wherever we're navigating to. As you expect, that primary work area changes. And we'll get familiar with all these different areas in Jira as we start to dig into things. But for now, I would encourage you to take some time in between videos, click around in here, and just start getting accustomed to where things are at and how the interface changes when you click around. And don't worry, you can always get back to this Your Work area by clicking on the logo up here. And that brings us to the end of this section. In the next section, we'll start by getting an understanding of the two types of projects inside of Jira: team-managed projects and company-managed projects. See you there. Before we dive into learning about team-managed projects, we'll take a couple minutes in this video to learn what team-managed projects are and how they compare to the other type of project in Jira, company-managed projects. So let's start with our team-managed projects. Team-managed projects were introduced into Jira in 2018 as next-gen projects, and then they were renamed in 2021 to team-managed project. The primary reason I want to point that out is because Jira's first release was in 2002, so team-managed projects coming in 2018 is relatively new. So depending on what version of Jira you're using, you may or may not have access to these. Now, one of the key things about team-managed projects is that they do not require any Jira administrative permissions to create them. And the reason for that is because all of the entities live inside the project. And by entities, I mean things like the issue types. So any issue types that you create inside of a team-managed project lives entirely inside that project. By comparison, the other type of project, the company-managed projects, they used to be called classic projects, and they were renamed in 2021 as well to correlate with the team-managed projects. A company-managed project requires Jira administrative permissions to create. One of the key reasons why Jira admin permissions are required for a company-managed project is because entities can be shared across other company-managed projects. So those entities, things like issue types and statuses and resolutions, for example, if you create a custom issue type in a company-managed project, any other company-managed project can use that. So you have to have Jira admin permissions across all of those projects to be able to assign those issue types to those different projects. On the flip side, the team-managed project, if you create a custom issue type in a team-managed project, it only lives in that team-managed project. No other team-managed project, no other company-managed project has access to that particular issue type. I mean, I suppose you could create another issue type. If you create an issue type called bug in one team-managed project, you could create another issue type called bug in another team-managed project. But from the back end, as far as Jira is concerned, those are two different issue types. They just happen to both have the same name. Okay, so to recap, team-managed projects have project scope entities. So things inside the team-managed project entirely live in that project. For that reason, or because of that, there's no special permissions to create a team-managed project. When you create one, you become the administrator of that project, and everything that you create lives inside of that project. That makes them very fast and easy to set up and maintain, because any team member in the organization can create one, and they can then maintain that project. They can invite other users to it, and the team can work together. Company-managed projects, on the other hand, because they have global entities that are shared across the entire organization, across the entire Jira installation, that means that requires that they have to be created and maintained by Jira admins. So for that reason, they can be more complicated to set up and maintain because these entities are shared across multiple company-managed projects. And we'll be looking at the more complicated company-managed projects and digging into those later on in this course. But for now, let's move on to our next video where we'll learn how we can create a team-managed project. In this video, we'll look at the process of creating a team-managed project. Unfortunately, this process is very simple. All we need to do is to come up to projects, create project. Now we can pick the project template. So this would go back to some of the concepts that we learned about in the last section. Is our team using a Kanban workflow, a Scrum workflow with sprints? If you're not familiar with these terms, we covered them in our previous section, just the concepts. These are Agile concepts. Or maybe we just want to bypass Agile altogether and manage a list of issue types like tasks and bugs. Or over here on the left, there are a lot more project templates that we can pick from. I do want to point out that depending on our version of Jira, we may not have access to all of these templates. So let me show you what I mean. If I come into service management and let's say the IT management one here at the top, notice there's a lock on this template. That's letting us know we don't have access to this yet because I'm using Jira software for this course, and this template requires features that are in Jira Service Management. Now, if we have admin permissions with access to billing, because that is a different product with different billing, we would have to have access to that. We could unlock that now. And the same goes for a lot of these templates. If we see this lock, basically it means our current Jira license doesn't have the features that we need for that template. Now, there are some templates that we could use. Let's go into design and let's pick this one here for project management. You can see this is using Jira Work Management as a product, but we have access to this template. The reason for that is because I'm using Jira software, and Jira software is basically Jira Work Management with the Agile software development features built on top. So I have access to the Jira Work Management templates. But let's go back to software development. I'm going to pick the Kanban template, and we can see what this template is doing for us. It's going to create some issue types for us. The epic issue type, story, bug, task, subtask. It's going to give us a workflow here with the columns on our board. Pretty simple, to do, in progress, and done. Let's go ahead and use this template. Now, the key thing to point out here is really this part right here. I want to mention this because when we create this project, if we create it as a team managed project, we cannot switch that to a company managed project later on. We have to create a whole new project to do that. And the same is if we create a company managed project, we cannot switch that to a team managed project later on. So we have to know which one we want to do at the point of creating. So let's select our team managed project since that's what we're working with here today. And let's give this a name. This will be our website 2.0. Give this a key. So this key is like team managed project since that's what so let's select our team managed project since that's what we're working with here today. And let's give this a name. This will be our website 2.0. Give this a key. So this key is going to be on all of the issues. So if we say this key is web, so all of the issues will be web-1, web-2. It'll just be a sequential order for all of the issues that get added into our project. Then, once we're happy with this, click on create, and our project gets created. All right, so now that we have our team managed project created, let's get familiar with how it is organized here in Jira. And we'll do that in our next video. In our last video, we looked at creating a team managed project. In this video, we'll continue right along and look at how to navigate around that project. So right away, we can see by default, we're taken to our project's Agile board. And this is a Kanban Agile board based on the project template that we chose in the last video. So the workflow for this is to take issues from left to right. So let's create a new issue here. Let's say this is our, let's just say go flowcharts for website functionality. There we go. Once we have this created, we can see a few different things here. So one, we can see the project key. This is something, again, I pointed out in the last video when we created this project. This is the first issue. So we can take this and we can left click and drag throughout the different columns, right? So that's the basic process that we're going to do. Take the issue from left to right as work is completed. Now, we can customize this. Let's say, you know what, we actually need a new column here for QA, so we can track that. So once we create this, then you can see how the cursor changes to a hand. I can left click and drag the entire column to organize this. And you know what, before this is actually done, we need to run this through QA to make sure that this has been done. And then once that's done, we can actually pull that in. Now up here at the top, we can filter any of the issues. So if we wanted to filter those issues, say just show the ones that have to do with the flow chart, you can see how it's highlighting that. course, we only have one issue on here, so it's pretty simplified. But we also have the ability to see who is in this project and who really filter by that. So only see the issues that are assigned to me, right? So right now, none of the issues are assigned to me. Let's change this here. Select this. The assignee, right now it's unassigned. Let's assign this to me. And now we can see this issue has been assigned to me. And we can start to filter those issues that based on who those issues are assigned to within the project. Now we can take that to another level if we want by grouping them. So we can group it by the assignee or by if there's subtasks. Let's see what this looks like. You can see when we group this, it creates in Agile, this is called a swim lane. And so basically what this does is it gives another way of viewing and filtering out the issues. If you think, we have a lot of different issues on this board, being able to group them is really, really nice way of doing that. And see, okay, these are the issues that are unassigned, which maybe we need to assign that to somebody and make sure that that gets done. So work isn't slipping through the cracks. Of course, in this example, we only have one issue assigned to me, so we only see this one. But actually, you know what? Let's change that. Let's look at creating more issues and get a better look at that screen that we saw when we assigned that issue. So let's move on to our next video where we'll do that. In this video, we'll look at creating issues in team-managed projects. So there's a couple ways that we can create issues, including the one that we looked at in our last video here on the board. Just to clean this up, I'm going to go ahead and switch this back so we're not grouping it by the assignee. So we can come in and create an issue. Let's say maybe this is our UX plan for whatever our issue is. Hit enter on the keyboard and we have our issue created. Now another way that we can create an issue is using the create button up here at the top or by using the keyboard shortcut C for create. So when we hit the keyboard, make sure I'm not actually have that selected. There we go. Hit the keyboard shortcut C and we can see it's going to pop up this window. Hit the keyboard shortcut C. There we go. Hit the keyboard shortcut C and we can see it's going to pop up this window where it can create an issue. Now, the key difference here, as you can see, is we have a lot more fields that we can fill out when we create the issue this way. So let's give this a title. Access here, of course, means that this is a required field. And summary is kind of a special field in Jira. So if you look on the board here, you can see that's the summary. And so it's displayed in different places inside of Jira that make the summary a required field, really across all of the issue types. We can add whatever we want to these fields. But I do want to point out this little checkbox down here. This is just a little tip from my experience. It's saved a lot of time. But as soon as I hit create, this window will close. But if we're creating multiple issues, then sometimes it can be just time consuming to hit create and then it closes and then we have to open it back up again. So if we check this little create another box, when I hit create, this window is going to stay open. So we can create another one, whatever we want our summary to be. And we could just continue doing that, continue creating those. We can see our other issue has been created. This, and now when I hit create, that window is going to close out and we can see those issues have been added to the board. Another little tip when creating issues, let me hit C to get back to this here, is if we don't need all of these fields, sometimes, especially again, if we're creating multiple issues, sometimes it can be annoying to see all of these fields and have to scroll up and down if we don't really need to. So we can configure the field. Fields and customize this to only show the ones that we want. We want to show an attachment, show how it's flagged. We want to add in labels. However we want to customize this, we can configure those fields that we see just to make it a little bit faster to fill this out and create our issues. Now, it is worth pointing out that we can customize this and add or remove fields from this list, and we'll look at that in our next video when we're configuring this project. But before we do that, there is one more thing I want to show. Let's create this issue here. The design there, create that. So all of these issues. here, you can see a difference between these issues and this one right here, who it's assigned to. So we can assign these to different users. Even if we didn't fill these fields out when we first created it, if we create it on the board and it just creates the issue right away, like we saw for this one here, as soon as we click on the issue, it's going to open up this screen where we can see those fields and assign it to somebody else if we want to, assign it to Mary on our team. And then once we close out, we can see this is assigned to Mary, right? And this one's assigned to Dan, and these are unassigned. So again, if we go back and we can group these, we can start to see on the issue, it's going to open up this screen where we can see those fields and assign it to somebody else if we want to, assign it to Mary on our team. And then once we close out, we can see this is assigned to Mary, right? And this one's assigned to Dan, and these are unassigned. So again, if we go back and we can group these, we can start to see how all of this works together and how we can use these issues to really start to filter down to only what we need to see. So when Mary is working, maybe she only wants to see the issues that are assigned to her because those are the ones that she really needs to focus on so she can filter those out. Similar to what we looked at in our last video when we're getting familiar with the layout. Okay, great. So now that we've seen how we can create issues and gotten some tips and tricks there, we've gotten more familiar with the fields that are on the issue by default, let's move on to our next video where we'll look at some of the ways that we can customize our team managed projects. See you there. In this video, we'll look at some of the ways that we can customize our team managed projects. So let's start with issue types and how we can add in a new issue type. Before we do that, I'm going to hit C on the keyboard just so we can see. Right now, we currently have two issue types in here. We have our task and our epic. So we cancel out of this and let's add in a new issue type. So go into project settings, issue types, and then add in a new, and go into project settings, issue types, and then add in a new issue type over here. We can see that Jira has a couple of them that are suggested that we can add, right? So we could either add one of these in, add that, and now if we create a new issue, we'll see that there's a bug in here as well. Or what we can do is we can come in and create our own custom issue type. So maybe let's call this an idea. Let's change the icon to the light bulb here, create that, and now we have our own custom issue type that we've created in our project. And you can see right here where we can customize the fields that are on that issue. So again, if I create this, we can see kind of how it looks on the other end. If I switch to a bug, let me show all the fields that have that filtered. So we can see the fields that we have on this issue type. Now, if we switch this to our new custom one, we can see these fields. And we can customize these. So let's say, on the idea, let's give this a due date on, actually, you know what, we can even come in here. Here and say, let's give this a drop down. Actually, let's do this on the bug. Let's do that on the bug. Save this. And it's on the bug. You can come in here and say, let's give this a drop down. Actually, let's do this on the bug. Let's do that on the bug. Save this. And on the bug, we'll come in and do a drop down. And this is going to be location on sites, and fill in the options that we want in the dropdown. So maybe it's in the header, body, or the footer. Okay, make sure to save the changes. Now, if we create a new issue as a bug, we can see we have this dropdown that we've added. And this is just a really great way to be able to organize everything, be able to say, you know what, the bug is actually in the footer on the site, and then we can start to fill this in and start to add in more descriptions to that. But on the idea, we have a due date. That field that we added in, we have that. We don't have the location on the site field. So hopefully this starts to get kind of gears turning in your head. You can start to see how the fields are on the issues, and like I mentioned earlier in the last section, how the issues contain the fields that are going to contain your data, and you can come in and start to create custom fields or add in some pre-built fields. Basically is what Jira has for some of those, like the due date. Really just kind of a pre-built field that is a date field, right, and automatically created for it. Okay, so now before we wrap this up, I want to kind of go over some of the rest of the settings that we can customize Team Maintenance Project. Customizing the issue types is probably going to be one of the more popular things that you're going to do. That's why I want to focus on that quite a bit. But let's go through some of these other settings that we have to customize our team management projects. So head back to our project settings here. So in the details, these are some of the settings that we picked when we created the project. We can change that here, things like the name of the project, the issue key that you can see here, as well as choosing who the default assignee is going to be. So when we were creating those issues, they were assigned to nobody. We could choose instead, you know what, I want it to be assigned to the project lead, which we can set right here. So if this was set to project lead, when I create a new issue, unless I assign it to somebody specifically, then it will be assigned to the project lead, in this case, Dan. And what that's going to do, what I've done in my experience with teams here, is to set a point of contact on the team to have any issues created assigned to that person. So that person is kind of in charge of making sure that nothing slips through the cracks. Anything they will then delegate to who it needs to go to, or if it's something that they need to do, then of course they can take control of that as well. We have the settings for our board. So in here we can come in and add in new columns that we looked at. We can reorganize the columns if we need to. We can customize our board however we want. Now you'll notice we have the columns here, but we also have the statuses, right? So this is something that's kind of cool. I'm going to take this. Let's add this here, and let's come in and delete this column. So now we have two statuses on a single column. Watch what happens when we do this. I'm going to come back to the board here, right? So this is something that's kind of cool. I'm going to take this. Let's add this here, and let's come in and delete this column. So now we have two statuses on a single column. Watch what happens when we do this. I'm going to come back to the board here. Now, but this, we're going to take this, let's add this here, and let's come in and delete this column. So now we have two statuses on a single column. Watch what happens when we do this. I'm going to come back to the board here. Now, but group this by nothing. So, okay, so now if I come in here and I click and drag this, I can say, you know what? I can either take this to in progress, or I can take this to QA. So those are statuses, right? So if I click on this, you can see the current status of this particular issue. If I take this and drag it to QA, that takes right? So this is something that's kind of cool. I'm going to take this, let's add this here, and let's go ahead and delete this column. So now we have two statuses on a single column. Watch what happens when we do this. I'm going to come back to the board here. Now, but group this by nothing. So, okay, so now if I come in here and I click and drag this, I can say, you know what? I can either take this to in progress, or I can take this to QA. So those are statuses, right? So if I click on this, you can see the current status of this particular issue. And nothing. So okay. So now if I come in.